Hello and welcome to a very special IFLScience Halloween podcast. Spooky season has brought us here to Chillingham Castle in Northumberland, which is allegedly the most haunted castle in Britain. I'm Rachel Funnell, writer and producer for IFLScience, and on this adventure I brought several of the IFLScience team with me. So guys, I was wondering if you could please introduce yourselves and tell me how you're feeling when you found out you'd be spending the night here.
I'm Dr. Becky Corgill, IFLScience Custom Content Manager. And seeing as I mainly organised a lot of this, I feel like this is my fault.
It's your doing.
I am so sorry, everyone. But
I'm Chris Carpinetti. I'm the senior video editor at IFLScience, and the news that I'd be spending the night in allegedly the most haunted castle in Britain filled me with dread. Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome.
I'm Dr. Russell Moore, science writer for IFLScience, and I was quite excited when I was told. It's a novel experience, it's quite fun.
So we're here to dive into the science of fear, why we feel afraid, what happens when we're feeling afraid, and going to a haunted castle seemed like a sensible place to start. We've had a quick look around already. I mean, what do you guys think?
It's impressive. Give it that.
Yeah.
It's a really cool place.
I mean, the number of knickknacks is off the charts.
It's
insane.
a really strange place.
It's just, what is it? It's like going into a
A time capsule,
yeah,
in many ways.
1,000 years
Yeah.
full of stuff. And there's a lot of stuff.
It's like there's various rooms that you go into. You walk into something that looks like a Regency banquet hall, and then several rooms above you, you're in something that looks like a World War II museum. So it's just like it's history over many, many centuries just in one building.
Yeah, with no necessary order either. So you might have a Regency room, but when you're looking in the Regency room, you might also then just have a mannequin in the corner.
Yeah.
Something bizarre. So it's very eclectic.
The elephant. Did
Yes.
anyone else see the elephant?
It's a big shiny
Yeah,
elephant.
that
Yeah.
came
There was
out
a
of
literal
nowhere.
elephant in the room.
So science of fear, when we talk about that, I mean, what are the signs and symptoms? What are we looking for?
So we are hoping to conduct an investigation into the psychology and the physiology of fear. By physiology, I think we're talking effectively about how our body reacts when we're afraid. If we're put in a scary situation, are our heart rates going to change? Are we going to sweat more? Are we going to need to go to the toilet? Are people suddenly going to start screaming? Becky. But
Yeah.
otherwise, with the psychology, it's more basically a behind the scenes look of human psychology of scary things. Why are we afraid of these things? Why do we think we see ghosts? And why are we afraid of the dark in some situations as well? Hopefully we will find that out tonight.
I'm excited to see how it goes. And I mean,
I'm glad you are excited.
and how are we going to see how it goes? What's the plan?
So we're going to be splitting into two groups. There's myself and Chris, who are the scared team. And then...
Not gonna lie, it's gonna, bit spooked.
yeah, and then there's Rachel and Russ, who are the brave team.
Well, we think.
Well, yeah.
Well, you guys rated yourself as not scared. We rated ourselves, I think, 3.5. 3 out of
3
5.
and 4 out of 5.
Yeah. Screaming all the time, things like that.
Well,
So we're gonna try. So we're gonna try and find the most haunted or most secluded room.
we have found a dungeon, which is very, very small.
Yeah, that's
It's a snug space.
taking off the claustrophobia there, I think.
And if we're plunged into pitch darkness for 20 minutes...
Yeah, I'm already feeling my heart rate.
Do you think you're going to be okay to be in a room under the gaze of the Spanish witch?
That's the alternative room, is we shut ourselves in the room where the Spanish witch is said to haunt.
Oh my goodness.
All the dungeons that have the claw marks on the walls.
Yes.
And the skeletons have been found, multiple, in the manhole, in the latrine, shall we
The
say.
latrine drop. Yes.
Haunting a latrine's not the one, is
You
it?
wouldn't want it for, eternity.
But with these two
Shit
groups, the scared the scared people and the brave people, we will be every so often measuring heart rate, and we will be filming all of it just to see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up kit, because I've seen all sorts of strange things coming out of the bags today. Talk me through, what have we got with us?
Oh, we've got was it electromagnetic field detector?
Of course.
Yeah, of course. And it's something that reminds me of ghost busting. So it's this little weird device that's got a shiny little light, and whenever you wave it around and there's a ghost, apparently it goes red. Now, we also know that it goes off if it's near a mobile phone. So let's see what happens tonight.
Mobile phone, wiring, any electric source, Wi-Fi devices.
Yeah. In a castle linked up to Wi-Fi, anything could happen. And we won't know if it's a ghost in the wire or a ghost in the room.
I like it. It's alerting you to the two great threats. It's either a ghost or you got an email, both equally terrible.
But we've also got dowsing rods, which are like two, like silver. It reminds me of like a lecture hall, like pointer. We've got two of them, and apparently when they cross or don't cross,
It depends on what's going on. The people who believe that you can communicate with spirits using them say that they will sometimes cross. That will indicate that you've got some sort of ghostly presence, or they might part. You are supposed to establish a baseline by asking them questions, and that will give you an indication of what's going on. But, yeah.
Then we also have recording devices for EVP, which is electro voice phenomena. Allegedly, you ask spirits questions, record the silence, and when you play it back, probably on full volume, you might hear something in the dark.
and we also have Russ's dowsing crystal as well.
Yeah, or operating in a similar way to the dowsing rods. Though this is just a crystal and basically a chain that swings in different directions and is supposed to indicate if there is a presence nearby. It's meant to answer questions depending on what it's doing.
I like that we've got ways, to reaching out to them. We're going to do our interview here, and then we're going to go out and interview the boys, see what they've got to say.
And in a more direct route, we will also be conducting a seance.
Yes.
With a lovely, lovely Ouija board, which isn't remotely scary.
Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to ask about this because I feel like it's one of those things you see in movies all the time, but I don't really know that much about what actually happens when you begin and what it's supposed to do. I mean, can you enlighten us?
I mean, it's the famous ghost hunting tool now. You can't watch a TV show around ghosts without having seen the Ouija board. You have a high-tech version where you have the board itself with alphabet over it and yes and no answers, and you have a device, kind of heart-shaped device with a hole in it called a planchette, which you put your fingers on, and then if the spirits are present, they're supposed to move in correspondence to the questions you ask. You can have a low-tech version, which is basically you can use an upturned glass on a table and use paper with an alphabet out and basically get the same results. And again, the whole idea is being that you're becoming a channel as a group. You'll lightly place your finger on the planchette of the glass, and it's supposed to move around and be dictated to by the spirits themselves. That's the story. The alternative perspective is that every person who's putting their fingers on it is actually capable of influencing it. And there's been studies that have shown it's a process called idiomotor movement, that we are unconsciously moving and influencing the device. So it's the same with the pendulums and the dowsing rods. There's small little micro movements on our part where we're thinking we're being very careful and very still. Actually, we are still sending signals and we are actually influencing the outcome.
I mean, that kind of science ties in nicely with the discussion you had with Chris French the other day, right? So can you just introduce who Chris French is?
Oh, yeah, no, sure. We had a great pleasure of speaking to Professor Chris French, who's a retired anomalistic psychologist at Goldsmiths in London. His background is very much looking into the psychology of paranormal experiences, but it's different to a parapsychologist.
I mean, I think that sounds awesome. So let's listen to a clip of it now.
Well, so we're going to be having lots of fun in the dark at Chillingham. My final question to you is, what do you think we should be kind of keeping our eyes out for ourselves? What should we be mindful in terms of our own experience there?
Well, as I understand it, I think you said earlier that you were going to be divided into a kind of a couple of you that were not really believers and a couple of you that are believers. I would really expect the non-believers to be in for quite an unexciting night. The believers, on the other hand, I've seen this firsthand, taking part in various kind of ghost watches, etc. over the years. That psychologically they can kind of psych each other up, and so somebody thinks they hear something, they go, what was that? What was that? And then the next thing, can you see something moving over in the corner? Oh, what's that? And it just ratchets up. So the believers, the scaredy cats, are likely to have a more exciting evening. I'd say basically go in there, kind of enjoy it. Make sure you've got lots of activities and lots of snacks.
Yes, lots of snacks.
Maybe the odd little kind of bottle of whiskey or something. Help the night along.
Now, I feel like I'm a little bit nervous about this evening because, as you said, when you asked us about how we felt before coming here, I would say I'm someone who typically doesn't get that scared. I watch a lot of horror movies. I kind of throw myself into it. But that said, I was just sitting in one of the other rooms a minute ago and this little cupboard opened. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't just feel the tiniest little squirt of fear. And, this kind of reminds me of like how strange it is that we put ourselves up for this. We literally volunteered. Like, do you guys think you get a little bit of a thrill out of scaring the bejeebus out yourself?
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
100%. In the past, I've been to things that are like, oh goodness, what are they called? You go somewhere in the middle of the woods as a Halloween event, and it's like a sort of scary town experience, and you have like actors jumping out at you with chainsaws, thankfully with the blades removed from the chainsaws. But you still get that feeling of, oh my God, I'm being chased through the forest in the dark by a clown with a chainsaw. This is terrifying. Afterwards, it's fun because you're just filled with adrenaline. And it's like, oh, wow, that's amazing. It's kind of the same thing as like when you're watching a really good horror movie. You get that sort of, the jump scare, or you get the sort of psychological terror thing of, the chill down your spine and that kind of thing. But then afterwards, it's like, whoa, that was really cool.
Becky, do you have anything that you like to do to scare yourself on purpose?
I've been to a lot of Alton Towers, scare nights, scare fests. Other theme parks are available, just in case.
Not a sponsor.
Yeah.
Not affiliated.
Not affiliated. But because I live so close to that theme park, so I am used to going on, the roller coasters, on all of the interactive, the ones that they do jump out and scare for the actors and stuff. So I think there was one where I was waiting in queue for a ride, and it was just in the distance there was this white dressed female small child, and it was the nursery rhyme like la 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 la. I was like, oh. Hated it but loved it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And Russ, other than hanging out with your colleagues in a haunted castle, anything you like to do to feel fear?
Not entirely sure, really. I love horror movies. I love ghost stories. Always have done. I suppose I kind of come from this from a slightly different angle, which is that actually as a kid I actually was the scary thing jumping out and scaring people. I actually used to work for theatrical companies that did Halloween events, and I was actually...
I can so see that.
Yeah, of course you did.
I'm the thing that went boo, which is why I'm a little bit kind of desensitized to it, because I was on the other side of it, so I find this very fun and interesting.
You're like the alternative Walter White. I am the thing that says boo. Well, this segue I brought up so smoothly there because I did actually speak to the guys over at the Recreational Fear Lab, and here is what they had to say about whether fear can be fun. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mark and Matthias. I was wondering if we could just kick off with you guys introducing yourselves and telling us a bit about what it is you do. So perhaps we could start with you, Mark?
Yes, sure. So my name is Mark Anderson, and I'm a cognitive scientist and one of the two co-directors of the Recreational Fear Lab. And I'm at Aarhus University. like my esteemed co-director.
And that would be me, Matthias Claesen. I'm an associate professor in literature and media, and the other slightly less esteemed co-director of the Recreational Fear Lab.
Fantastic. And I mean, for people who aren't familiar with it, what can you tell me about the Recreational Fear Lab? What is it and what do you do?
So the Recreational Fear Lab is a research center at Aarhus University. And our mission is to conduct scientific investigations of what we call recreational fear. And recreational fear really is activities that are about deriving pleasure from being frightened. And it's a really interesting phenomenon because it's not only incredibly pervasive, it's something that you'll see everywhere once you start looking for it, but it's also sort of scientifically neglected. So people do many things in order to be frightened. And it begins very early in life when an infant will gain great pleasure from the baby jump scare that is peekaboo, or find enjoyment in chase play or hide and seek. But it's also teenagers who get together for horror movie nights. It's middle-aged people who scratch the itch of midlife crisis by taking up extreme sports. It's people going on roller coasters. So all kinds of things where it's really about feeling frightened, anxious, terrified, startled, and getting pleasure from that.
So what I love about what you were mentioning there, Matthias, is about how, when I think about the idea of getting pleasure from fear, I immediately jump to, the traditional spooky things, like you mentioned, horror movies and, haunted house experiences. But you're right, there's so many different ways in which this comes up in our lives from, you mentioned extreme sports there. There are some people, though, in life who, I would say anecdotally, I've met people who don't like watching horror movies, they don't like doing, scary experiences. So is it a universal thing or a kind of sliding scale?
We don't know, but I think probably it's very close to a universal thing. So just the other day I was teaching a class of about 30 students, and I asked them to tell me a story from their own life where they were frightened but also found some kind of pleasure in it. And not a single student could not think of something. However, people are obviously different, and we sort of have different sweet spots, if you will, different levels of fear that we find pleasurable. And some love going to extreme haunted houses, whereas others get that, sweet fear from listening to a true crime podcast in the comfort of their home. But I do think that there is a lot of individual variation in this so-called sweet spot, which is a term that comes from a study we did. It's a study Mark thought up and spearheaded some years ago, conducted at a haunted house, where we found sort of the formula for just the interesting relationship between fear and enjoyment.
Yeah, I think on that vein, I'd say I kind of fit into the horror movies and I guess true crime stuff. Haunted houses a step too far to me. Would you be happy to share what your kind of fear pleasure is?
Yeah, I mean, so Matthias is the horror buff between the two of us, but over the years he has sort of lured me into more and more sort of daunting horror ventures, and I kind of now like going to haunted attractions, which was not a thing that I liked when I first met Matthias and we started up our collaboration.
I think my two favorite sort of recreational fear activities are reading scary books and also social horror experiences. Mark and I have been through haunted houses a lot together, and it's always, an experience to be treasured. I mean, you learn so much about each other, and you have a really intense, fun experience that you can revisit. I've taken my family to haunted houses. I like watching scary movies with my family. I do have things that sort of fall beyond my sweet spot, and that would include playing horror video games. That's too much for me.
Yeah, it's interesting actually to hear about your take on haunted houses, because IFLScience are actually planning a trip where we're going to go to sort of study how we respond and things like that. So maybe it'll be the thing that changes my mind. So one thing I've often found when I've spoken to people who don't like horror movies, and I've talked about enjoying them, is they say, well, you know, that's very weird. So do you think it's safe to say that it's normal to derive some pleasure from fear?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think, people, maybe tend to forget how there are so many other phenomena outside of horror, and people tend to associate, frightening entertainment with horror. But the people that say that they don't like horror, they often like a good thriller or listening to, as Matthias said, a true crime podcast. If they are very young, say toddlers, they enjoy being chased by someone pretending to be really scary. So it's really just levels. It's rare to find someone that doesn't like any kind of fear at all.
Absolutely. And so I suppose that then kind of brings us to the big question of, do we know why it is that we like to be afraid?
Our working hypothesis is that it has to do with learning, essentially. Some of the sort of science that we were inspired by comes from play and curiosity research, and those fields, suggest that the rewards that are associated with play and curiosity in children and adults really have to do with you being able to sort of consume the information that you surround yourself with. So children tend to be interested, for instance, in phenomena in general that somehow sort of moderately deviates from what they know already. So things they can't quite predict yet, but that they have the sense that they might be able to learn about. And we think essentially that horror and fear works the same way, that if you get exposed to a manageable amount of fear, whatever that may be, given your knowledge and skill sets and competencies, then that's where you can extract enjoyment, really mediated by you learning about that situation or that scenario, or sort of gaining control over it.
Yeah, the concept of manageable fear is an interesting one, because I guess that's where people meet different thresholds then. They can handle a thriller, but a slasher's too far. It's a topic that I find absolutely fascinating, and the idea of the Recreational Fear Lab I just absolutely love. Are there any kind of recent research projects you could talk us through?
Yeah, so we have a lot of projects right now that is under review. Actually, we've been looking recently into so full disclosure, this is non-peer-reviewed, or at least totally peer-reviewed research as it stands. But we're right now, one of our projects is that we're looking at if recreational fear might have not only psychological benefits, which is something that is a shared hypothesis, I think, right now in the sort of field, but also physiological positive effects. So specifically, we're working with doctors here in Aarhus, looking into how recreational fear might stimulate a healthy immune response. So that's one of the things we have in the pipeline. Another really interesting project that I'm very enthusiastic about is led by our colleague Mihaela Tiranu, which is sort of an attempt to systematically map all the, you could say, types of activities where children, from when they are 1 year old to when they grow up, engage in different kinds of activities that some way or somehow makes them feel frightened, but also really makes them enjoy themselves. That's probably the two projects I'm most excited about right now.
Yeah, that's a fascinating idea about recreational fear being connected to a healthy immune response. If people want to kind of keep up with what the results of these projects are, where can they go to sort of learn more about your work?
They should visit our website. It's called fear.au.dk, and that's where we sort of tell the world about recent discoveries, and there is a whole subpage on our publications. And so as soon as that study, which involved taking blood samples from guests at a haunted house before they went in and once they came out, and then 3 days later to look at immune cells in the blood. Once that study is out, we'll publish it on the website.
Excellent. I can't wait to see it. And just finally, kind of more broadly on the science of fear, I was wondering if either of you have any kind of like big questions that you're hoping to answer next.
Well, I think so. Every time we make a discovery or get a result in this field of recreational fear, it's like kicking down one door and discovering you're standing in a room with 10 new doors that lead to who knows where. So, for example, I mentioned before the sweet spot, which is this finding that there's a sort of rainbow-shaped relationship between fear and enjoyment if you plot the two in a coordinate system. So that if people are engaged in a recreational fear activity that is too scary for them, enjoyment goes down. But if it's not scary enough, enjoyment is also low. But maximum enjoyment is found at the peak of the rainbow, which is when the fear level is just right. That was an interesting discovery, that we could identify and measure the sweet spot physiologically and in terms of what people told us. But it opens up so many new questions, for example, about individual variation, about the degree to which that sweet spot changes across one's life or with different life phases or life experiences. So there are many still unknowns. I mean, one kind of direction we've been pursuing in the lab, kind of by accident, is in terms of positive effects. And more it looks like it might actually be good for you to seek out recreational fear experiences, but there is still so much we don't know. For example, whether people can use recreational fear as a kind of counter measure for development of anxiety. There's some kind of indirect evidence, but we need more studies, and to conduct more studies we need more funding. That's sort of life in the big city of research.
Yeah, I love the idea that the peak of fear enjoyment is at the top of a rainbow. That's fantastic imagery. Well, thank you so much for talking us through your work today, Matthias and Mark. It's been fascinating to hear about it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
So I guess it's time to go and find out what our sweet spot of fear is. You guys ready to go?
Oh yeah. No, woo! Not even remotely. Can we just stay here for a bit longer?
We went off to explore the castle, including a brief stop in the dungeons to see how our bodies responded to being in this uncomfortable and spooky place. And then it was time to go and meet the ghost guide, who came prepared with all kinds of gadgets that just might help us break through to the other side. Well, hello guys. Looks like we survived. And I mean, I've got to say, I know we were literally doing this trip to talk about how our brains and bodies can trick us into feeling fear, but there was a little bit of me that was worried that we might actually get proven wrong. It seems like a horror movie waiting to happen. So, first question, got to be the big one. Did anyone see anything? Chris, perhaps we could start with you.
I didn't see anything that I couldn't explain. I think that's a good way of putting it. I definitely went into this with a certain preconception that I probably wasn't going to see anything, but knowing full well that I was going to feel scared. And I did feel scared, and I did feel very spooked on multiple occasions, and yet I'm convinced that my eyes were playing tricks on me. At one stage, which I imagine you'll get into as well, when we were in one of the rooms in the dark, and you were blindfolded and you were listening to a ghost box, which we'll get into again in a minute because it's quite a contraption. And you were saying what you were hearing, and you were saying random words. And at that stage, I had sort of zoned out, and I was staring up above you in the dark. And my eyes were getting used to the dark. And at that stage, I thought I could see a figure in the window on sort of the landing above where you were, sort of just swaying, rather like one of those wacky inflatable waving arm men. And just as I saw that, and just as I thought to myself, no, my eyes are playing tricks on me, you, blindfolded and with noise-cancelling headphones, just said, upstairs. And I went, no. No, not fond of that. But yeah, again, there was something in front of the window. I think it was like a giant ram's skull or something, and it was so windy. In terms of other things, I was super primed, so I was very on edge, and every noise that I heard made me jump, especially after we'd finished. I was trying to sleep, and I was trying to convince myself everything's fine, you can just fall asleep. And there was a regular noise that sounded like somebody stood on the stairs in our little apartment, just creaking the floorboards, and I would spring awake every time I heard that. But I slept. For a few hours I did sleep, but the thing that put me on edge the most was the next morning, when I got up out of bed, went round little corridor into the bathroom, shut the door, and I heard someone else then coming down the corridor, and they were sort of next to the door, and you can just sort of hear them shuffling on the floor, just sort of waiting for me to come out. I assumed that it was one of our team. No one there. Everyone who had asked, did you come in, did you try and get in the bathroom, and everyone like, no. So I was like, okay, that's the creepiest thing I think that I experienced, was next morning in broad daylight, just experiencing someone who wasn't there. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm not over being primed the first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I think it was definitely the kind of setup in that place where you could hear everyone in the different rooms. And I mean, there was all those doors that were ridiculously noisy, and I could certainly see
horror noises, the doors.
Yeah, you could use that as a soundscape for your own movie. And I mean, just to give people a bit of background on what Chris was mentioning there about the spirit box, I believe it was called. So we had this fantastic guide who was showing us around, and we were like, well, if we're here, we're going to throw ourselves into it. So we got them to use all of their ghost hunting gadgets, and one of these was a spirit box. So the person who was wearing the device, I guess you'd say, they had a pair of noise-cancelling headphones that were playing audio from this little box. I think he said it was like 115 milliseconds of frequency being played backwards. So it was a lot of short, sharp bursts of white noise with what sounded like snippets from DJ radio stations.
Yeah, it was linked to AM, FM radios, the frequencies, yeah.
And occasionally these voices would come through and you were asked to say out loud what it was saying. I mean, Becky, I know you sat with the spirit box for quite a long time. Maybe you could talk about what you heard.
Yeah, the spirit box. Yeah, so I was sat there with a Draco skeleton eye mask on as well, which the pictures, I don't think communicate how serious you think you're taking it, and then you just have a picture and it's Draco skeleton and headset. But yeah, it was white noise, and then every few moments you hear bloop, bloop, and then I think at one point it was bad boys. It's oh, well, that's interesting. Who's bad boys? And then you just be trying to crane your ears, trying to strain them, even trying to work out what on earth these spirits were trying to tell you. I think I said Simon a lot. Had no idea who Simon was during the time, but Simon, love, Earth. I think I said Spider-Man at one point.
You did say Spider-Man, that made me laugh.
Meat. What else?
Bacon.
Yeah. Bacon. Did I say bacon? Yeah. Bad Boys was
because it was said ladies and bad boys, but it was just it was
See, that just sounds like a radio DJ.
Yeah, it was very radio DJ-esque because it wasn't the same voice. It was just little clips from little things, and then most of the other time it was like little almost jingles that you heard, like a bloop bloop, and you're like, oh. But I think for me, I felt like I was under there for a good hour, but I don't think I was. I think it was probably like 10 minutes.
20 minutes.
Okay, but yeah, it was an interesting experience, especially because I felt a bit of FOMO, because I was like, what is everyone else like hearing? I'm just here in my own little world, and I'm starting to get a bit bored because I'm just like, yeah, love, bacon, bad boys.
While you were having the spirit box experience, we were testing out the human pendulum idea. And I mean, I know what you said, Chris, about being primed and trying to look for things. That came up a bit for Russ. So, Ross, could you just talk about what you were saying about how we search for faces and how you were trying to take that for a spin?
Yeah, I suppose the kind of the big context set we need to say is that this guide that we had for the evening had his own gadgets that he wanted us to kind of explore and play with, and we were leaning into them. So the spirit box itself is supposed to be, although it's scanning through the AM, FM frequencies, the idea behind it for people who ghost hunt is that the spirits, if they're present, are supposed to be able to kind of hijack that white noise and articulate something through. So you're going to supposedly get bits of scratched information from anything that the frequency is picking up anyway. But equally, it's supposed to also throw in voices from the dead, and that then, while we had an individual who's basically kind of being a medium for that, they've got the headphones on, they've got the eye mask, and they're just repeating what they're saying. On the outside of that, the rest of us are supposed to be kind of doing things within the space, trying to communicate. We're asking questions of the spirits that are present. So the random things that the person who is experiencing the box are supposed to then correspond to answers we're hoping to get from the spirits around us. And the guide who we're dealing with, who was supplied by the castle, tried some other processes for us to play with, and one of them is called the human pendulum, where you have an individual standing with their eyes closed, and two people either side for safety, and then this guide was asking the spirits to influence them by kind of giving them a push in either direction, and the idea would be that we'd ask a question, and a positive would be like feel an inclination to lean forward, or they'll feel an inclination to lean back if it's a negative, and that's the kind of the way of testing positive negative responses. So the story goes, but at the same time we're doing this in the dark, we're tired, we're standing bolt upright, and I don't know if you've ever tried to stand upright with your eyes closed and keep balance, but your body is automatically starting to tilt, and it becomes very easy to just sway and give into that motion. But while I was standing in the position to catch, I think it was yourself, Rachel, as you're leaning or not leaning, as it were, in response to this, the room was extremely dark, and there was, I think, a single light source, which was a single candle, I think, on one part of the room, and it's casting shadows. And I was just looking at your face, and I could see the shadows dancing across your face, and it was distorting my eyes, were then interpreting the space, and it was creating and projecting other faces onto yours. So I said at one point, you looked like you had a monocle and a large curly moustache, and I knew full well if I articulated that, then the guide would say that this was proof positive that there's something trying to interact with me. But I've seen this before, and I know that I could then shift and think, right, no, actually you're going to look like an old lady, and then suddenly you take on the visage, you'd get wrinkles and things like this, and you look like an older person, and it's just my eyes trying to make sense of the lack of information coming through from the light, and it's so easy to be suggested.
I mean, would you say it's a good look for me, the monocle and mustache? Something to try out?
You could. It was a strong look, and I do think you could pull it off.
All right, that's good to know. I mean, I know myself, our ghost guide, he mentioned early in our evening that one of the ways that ghosts can supposedly manifest themselves is as a black orb. And I think the only thing that I saw was while he was sort of talking us through like what was going to happen in the evening and the history of the place. Again, it was low lighting. We had 2 candles, and I think I'd been staring at his face for so long as he spoke that when I shifted my eyes, there was a black sort of blob. And for a second I was like, oh my goodness. And then I remembered, well, it's like every time you accidentally stare at the sun and then you look away. And there's so it's incredible to see how, you know, even us going in as skeptical as we were, you start to realise where these things can crop up.
I did feel very easily suggestible throughout the entire evening, because he did start with a good hour-long talk to us about all of the different spirits and apparitions and experiences that people have had in the castle, and the names of these things and what they're said to have done to ghost hunters and guests, ranging from people just seeing little sparks in the air through to people reportedly getting like cuts on their neck, or you know, like feeling people being tugged or pulled by their hair. Luckily, me, with a memory of a goldfish, couldn't remember half of these names and experiences by the time he was calling out to these spirits in a different room. So I felt myself thinking, oh, I should be expecting one of those things that he just told us to happen in here, but I couldn't remember what. So I felt like maybe I had this sort of psychological guard against some sort of like of being primed. Yes, because they were creepy stories, but not being able to remember the exact details, I think, worked in my favour. Though I did get very spooked in the chapel area, very small, high-ceilinged, stone-walled chapel with these looming saint figures probably staring down over everyone. And that was my turn on the spirit box. After experiencing yourself and Becky saying the words and them ranging from just random people's names to love and Spider-Man, I thought, okay, this isn't going to be that creepy. But what the things that I heard were the name Rebecca, which I presume freaked Becky out.
Yes, it did.
Followed by the words the void and demon again, and I think poison. So
Yeah.
Great, I'm having a great time. This isn't scary at all.
That was a real low point, the double demon poison. And then at that point, the guide started seeing a dark presence, and I was like, oh, well, here we go. And at that time, Russ, you were having a twirl on the crystal. Could you talk us through that?
Yeah, so we moved on. So this is the final kind of thing we did in the evening. Moved down into the chapel space, where it's supposed to be associated with some sort of demonic entity that was brought into the mortal realm by a ritual gone wrong by Aleister Crowley, of all people, the famous occultic practitioner from the 20th century. And so we, as a kind of crescendo to the evening, for some reason this demon's called Tim, which I never quite understood. It goes by the name Tim. We were supposed to be interacting with this thing, and the guide set up a kind of a circle, like a pie chart, effectively separated into little segments, and it had responses on it: yes, no, maybe, ask again, and a crystal pendulum, which we've spoken about, and he was dealing with it and showing how to work it, and then asked for a volunteer, and I stepped up for that, and you put yourself in a position. His pendulum that he gave us had a ring at one end, a chain, and then a crystal suspended at it, and you put the ring over your thumb and then relax it so it dangles across your hand, and then the idea is it's supposed to respond. You ask questions and it will twist and spin and things like that, and we set up in the position for it, but you're basically put in a stress position where you've got to rest your arm in a particular area, and any tiny movement that I did would cause it to start swinging. And it became really easy for me to be thinking, and he'd be asking questions and things like this, and me to be thinking, my answer, if I was imagining this playing out, would be like, no, maybe not from what we've gathered, what we've been told about this entity, this character, how would it respond to this? And I could feel myself thinking, no, I don't imagine the demon would think like that. And then, lo and behold, the crystal starts swinging in that particular area. It became very easy for me to influence it with the smallest movements I wouldn't even notice. or an accident. I think I flexed at one point, and it moved in a direction that then just happened to correspond with Chris saying something, from the box. I think he just suddenly epivesced the phrase something like demon, or something like that. And you can so easily create a narrative out of these things, especially when you've got a guide who's there, who is persuading us that these entities have personalities that are established, and is kind of choosing responses that match that. And so I mean, it was fun. And at one point I did find myself kind of more playing with it. We're tired, it's nearly 2:00 in the morning. The last thing you want to be doing is having all this time just getting nowhere. It was a great opportunity to have let your imagination interact with this. And that's what we had, but it was just literally that, nothing more.
I mean, who knows? You said you were trying to figure out what the demon might want. Maybe Tim was, channeling through you, deciding which way to tip it.
Yeah, exactly. Tim, but for a demonic entity, had some pretty banal statements he wanted to impart.
I think an important takeaway as well is, regardless of what we believe we did or didn't see, the evening itself was fantastic. I mean, to hear about the history of the place, the passion that our guide had. So yeah, hugely grateful to the team for showing us around. And before we were joined by this ghost hunter, we also got to our own little experiment for the Science of Fear, which I know we're going to be doing a follow-up with the results for. But for me, myself, that was probably the scariest bit. Not even when it was my turn in the dungeon to sit with that room, but actually when I was waiting for you guys, Chris and Becky, to come out. Because that was probably the only time I was actually by myself. And I was in the Spanish witch room. And I remember sort of standing there, and it was supposed to be about recording you guys, but I could feel my heart going a little bit, and that door kept swinging and screaming, and that was probably the time I was most tuned into my own kind of physical reaction to what is undeniably a very spooky place. So I wanted to know, for you guys, regardless of whether you think you had any kind of ghostly encounter, what changes did you notice in your body? So perhaps, Becky, we could start with you.
Yeah, so just the Science of Fear experiment, that was an interesting, very, very interesting. It was dark when it happened. This was just before the ghost hunting experiment. And it was myself and Chris in this, it was a tiny, tiny dungeon, which we found out from Sir Humphrey Wakefield, the owner of a place. So that's where they used to stuff like up to 25 prisoners, including journalists, which I think was more of a stab at us rather than what they actually used to do, into this really, really small kind of stone cell. And there was like a grate where I think it was it oblette? I can't do French.
Oubliette.
Thank you, Russ. With like a grate in it, and it was just Chris and I just sitting there in mostly darkness with a torch just to illuminate a bit. And you do start feeling it. Like immediately you sit down, and I was like, I just do not want to be here. And of course, from that you can the fear. You're like, oh, there's a presence here, but it's just like you just don't want to be in this tight enclosed space in the dark with this grate that had wind kind of coming up from it. And I think I turned to Chris and said, oh, imagine if you just see hands appearing at the grate, which I don't think I should have done, Chris, because you were...
Yeah, that wasn't great, because I was really on edge at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was when I realised how jumpy I got that night. I think the heart monitors that we had on at one point said I was on 120 BPM.
125, yeah.
125, great, that's healthy. So yeah, I felt my heart racing a lot. I felt, I guess, adrenaline. I did have that sort of really on edge sort of preparedness, but then that was making any sort of little noise that I was hearing or anything I thought I was seeing. It was like jumping everything. I was literally jumping at shadows. I think at one point I looked behind Becky and I thought I saw something up there, but it was just a shadow of a rock on the ceiling. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, you were like, what is that? Like, through your arm almost into my face. I was like, oh,
Sorry. Sorry.
Oh, and it was like, there was a moth that kept on flickering through the light. And I think that kept on making us jump. And the funny thing is, I was expecting to scream.
I thought you were going to scream.
I thought so as well. I was not expecting to laugh out of fear. So that's something I want to explore about. Why do we laugh when we're afraid? Because it was just us hysterically laughing in terror of what is happening here. And I wouldn't want to do it again, even though I know it's perfectly safe. It's just the enclosed space. And then every now and again, we had a knock on the door just to signify, the time is nearly up, which I think freaked us up. I think our heart rate instantly spiked. I was like, oh no.
I can say it was quite a strange experience as the person standing on the outside to just hear the two of you like manically laughing from inside a dungeon. So we got all angles of it. And Russ, you are one of the less frightened of the group. So did you notice any physical changes as you were wandering about?
To contrast instantly with what was just being said, when it was, you and I were in the dungeon for our time, I found it just incredibly relaxing. You and I had a good natter.
We said it looked a bit like a sauna, didn't it? It had that sort of aesthetic.
Complete and utter contrast to what was going on. Obviously we didn't. Then we got kind of swept up in the rest of the event after that, so we didn't really get to kind of exchange notes. So I didn't realise you two had that much of an experience in there. 20 minutes later, myself and Rachel in there, just kind of sitting back, going, "Well, this is nice. It's always quite cozy, actually." So yeah, very, very contrasting. And but going around the space, it was a great space for the imagination. It was a fantastic space of imagination, especially when you've been primed with so many different stories and expectations, especially once we met up with the actual ghost hunter who was telling us about what's going on in the place. He'd separated the building into, it basically had an entourage of ghosts that we were likely to encounter, but they all had their kind of area of, dare I say, expertise, and you could almost anticipate a personality being a different space. We're taking into what is meant to be the torture room, and we're that's associated with a particular character. So and that particular character has a personality that is supposed to interact with you, and men and women in different ways. And so we're told, the women should be anticipating maybe something pulling their hair, scratching their necks, all this type of stuff. Men, you can expect to be gripped by the wrist and things like this. So we're being primed again with expectations of particular sensations in different spaces as we go through. And so it becomes very difficult then not to be thinking about that, even as a skeptic, going through and going, well, what's going on? But bearing that with that in mind, I didn't really. I just thought this was fun and novel the entire time going around, and I just had those moments where I can feel myself here. I can either just not engage with this and just treat it as an experience. I think I'd have had a very boring 4 hours, or at different points I could engage with it more imaginatively. But at no point did I feel like that this was not something that I was not just willing myself into taking part in. There was one moment where there was something slightly strange, which I was a bit entertained by, because our ghost hunter himself didn't pick up on it, and it was while we were still being told the stories of the location, and I think somebody had asked him a question, and then out in the corridor a strange noise kind of passed from one end of the corridor down the other, where it kind of went and nobody kind of craned their heads or anything, but I caught Chris's eye. Yeah, you looked at me and kind of frowned, and I looked at the door and I looked back at you and you nodded, and then we kind of, all of us kind of broke away at different points and went, well, what was that? And everybody articulated a similar noise, but none of us chased it, none of us went to really investigate it, and And that was the thing. It was a very windy corridor. It was also raining heavily all the way through the night. We basically had the perfect experience of getting to this haunted castle in a storm. And so wherever you went, there were leaks coming through. You could hear the rain battering against the ceiling in different places. So we were exposed to the elements. And you could easily, if you got kind of swept up in it, start creating all sorts of strange, knocks and bangs and things like this. But outside of a couple of curiosities, nothing that really I can say freaked me out in a particular way. And we were also primed in our own accommodation. We'd read the reviews from previous people, and immediately the night before us, in the space that myself and Chris were sleeping in, the entry for the day before was a group of people who mentioned that one of their party was dragged in bed by an entity they named Emma, and that Emma had also accused them of being disgusting twice, which we all thought was quite entertaining. So we've got that prime again whilst we're in that space. So even when we're going to be settling down to go to sleep, you might imagine we'd experience something then in the dark, knowing that we've just spent the night chasing ghosts. We're going to be sleeping in this space. I just passed out the moment I got in bed. And if Emma was there trying to torment me and tell me I'm disgusting, I didn't hear it. So
falling on deaf ears. I mean, I feel like a lot of these responses kind of tie into what we talked about at the start of this podcast about how how fear can be fun, and we got that from the Recreational Fear Lab guys. Then what you mentioned there about sleep, I mean, I'm someone who normally goes to bed at like 9, 10 p.m. So to stay up until 2 was a pretty big deal for me. But I found it easy, I think, because even as someone who, doesn't believe in stuff, when any little thing happened, I found it like thrilling, and the excitement of it, kept me awake. And I think for me as well, although I'm pretty firm in the fact that I don't believe in ghosts, I also am forever willing to admit that I could be wrong about stuff. So I think for me, that final room, the chapel, when Chris was coming out with all this terrifying stuff, and I was like, what if though? What if it just happened and now I have to change what I think about everything? And so for that reason, I think that was probably my highlight. I was wondering if just quickly we could go around and everyone give their favourite moment from the evening. So Chris, we'll start with you.
I think for me it was the hour where the ghost hunting guide was telling us all of these stories, because the entire 24 hours or however long we were there felt like a horror movie in the best possible, most exciting way. And it felt like one of those experiences. You can go to those places, I think I mentioned it at the start of this podcast, where you'll get chased through the woods by actors trying to scare you, and it's like that sort of experience. This felt similarly in a sort of ghost story type of way. And so being sat in this great hall, it wasn't the great hall, but it was a great hall, with all of these stone walls and ancient medieval weapons coating the walls, with antlers everywhere, a huge roaring fire in the massive grate on the side, and this very enigmatic man telling us all of these ghost stories and experiences from the past. It was just, and hearing, of course, the rain, as Russ was saying, battering against these mullioned windows. It was, I'm getting goosebumps now, actually, just remembering it, because that was the sort of pinnacle ghost hunting fun. It just felt like you were in a ghost story, or this is how horror films start. You sit down, you hear people telling you all of these scary stories, and then they go off and one by one they get killed. Thankfully no one died, but it was great to have that sort of intro experience where you had all this excitement and nerves, and like you just said then, the what ifs. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, 100% agree. What about you, Russ?
I don't think it was a particular moment that I can say was that's my favourite. Kind of similar to Chris, the atmosphere of the whole thing was just great fun. As I said, it was a fantastic space to kind of enter into and be given permission to fill it with your imagination, and that was wonderful. The guide was extremely charismatic and really kind of you had to really feel like you were part of something going on. It was good like that, but I suppose I think I said this to everybody at the time. I think on the comical side, the bit I did like the most was, again, in the chapel at the end, where we're supposed to be confronting, this demonic entity that's been kind of alluded to as this, what we don't want to encounter, because, it's a demonic entity. And Chris is there in the spirit box, and quite clearly, in contrast to the information coming through from, like, Spider-Man that Becky mentioned and things like this, he quite clearly got a message that he knew was going to be a slight theme change, and there was this sound of resignation in your voice as you just kind of exhaled and went, the void, demon, poison.
I was at that point. I was just thinking, of course, I'm hearing these things.
Yeah,
So
no one's ever been so fed up to be haunted before, I don't think.
Oh, it wasn't fed up. It was a resignation of, I've been asked to say these things out loud, and they are terrifying words in their own right. So it's like, fine.
And Becky, what about you? Highlight?
I think the pinnacle of when we were so tired in that chapel between, I think it must have been 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. I think that was one of my favourite points, because I think everyone had something to do almost, or everyone was kind of involved in some aspect of some job of what was going on. And I think the delirium of being that tired, because I'm the same as you, Rachel, is like, I go to bed early at 10 p.m. and I think I drove like 4 or 5 hours, so I was tired, and it kind of gives like almost a manic energy of you trying to stay awake and all hyped up. And you were the perfect primed position, because I think that was also the point where it was near the end. I think it was like 5 to 2, and you might have caught on camera, the guy was next to me. I had the spirit box that kept on coming out with these weird, like, John and weird things like that, and then Sally, who was one of the ghosts, and then he just quickly turned to where I was sitting, and he was like, oh, I just saw a black shadow move across the corridor. Of course, I was the only one that was in his line of sight that could see that, and I think I just instantly went, oh, don't stop it. And he just started explaining about this black shadow. So every like few minutes I was just like turning, going, is there going to be a black looming shadow? And I kind of didn't want to do it, but it was like a thing that you can help but look. And I knew nothing was going to be there, but it was, what if that was going to be the thing that proved everything? Just this shadowy figure just like staring at us like, what on earth are you doing? Like, you coming up with Spider-Man? I'm not saying that. So I think that was like my pinnacle of like where we were so delirious with tiredness that everything was just all ramped up to like 100%. And then at the end he was like, oh, it's 2:20. Right, let's go. And you're like, wait, what? It was like a shutdown. Yeah. Bye-bye.
It would be textbook journalists go ghost hunting to get accused of misquoting a ghost while you're in the building.
I did have to apologise to the kind of anything that was around me, because I was like, I'm sure you were trying to say something through the spirit box, but I just could not understand. Like, my brain process was not that fast. So you could have been just saying all your secrets about where apparently you're buried, because I think that's what the guide kind of asked, like, where are you buried? And I was just like bacon.
Yeah, we had
like,
bacon,
I said steamed
lettuce,
hams, not Spider-Man.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we'd just like to formally apologise to the ghosts of Chillingham if we ruined your evening.
I was going to say, this makes for this would be a great comedy sketch, wouldn't it? We see TV shows of mediums doing bits and pieces, and they're a feature of horror movies and detective shows and things. I'd love to watch something now which just has a crap medium. He's just the medium is really bad at giving information, mishears everything, and the spirits are getting incredibly annoyed.
That's why they throw things around.
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of wish we did have a recording of the spirit box itself, but of course it was so enclosed and us, we couldn't do it. So it would be great if we could have had that recording and see exactly what we actually said, whether it was something completely like benign or something that was supposed to be a bit more, terror-inducing, and we just completely lost the plot of love. And it's like,
I think that's possibly a good idea for a future experiment. Then we can grab one of these spirit boxes, see how different people interpret the noises, and then we've also got our idea for a future TV show. And I mean, Becky, I know you and I, we did as we were told. We thanked the spirits before we left and told them to stay put. So hopefully we've not come away with anything else attached to us. But no doubt we'll be back with another podcast if it turns out one of us is now haunted. I think that's a good point to kind of round off this deep dive into our ghost experience. So thank you so much for listening to our first ever Halloween special podcast. Hope you've enjoyed it. And guys, I hope you had a great time on the trip.
Great fun.
We did. Thank you very much.